This is the new Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio, and honestly not much has changed since we first saw this car in 2016, but then it didn't really need to. Alfa Romeo knew they were onto a winner, so apart from a bit more power, a few cosmetic changes and a new limited slip differential, it's pretty much the same. Trouble is, between the 2016 launch of the Giulia QV and now this updated model, rivals BMW have been very busy creating this, the BMW M3. And as you might expect, it's brilliant. So far in car magazine tests, it's seen off the Audi RS4, the hybrid Mercedes AMG C63S and the Audi RS6. But this is the first time we've pitted Italy against Germany in a battle of the best super saloons. Just on that point about saloons, you might have noticed that the M3 definitely is not a saloon. It's the M3 Touring, and the reason for that is because Car Magazine has been running this very car for the last few months on its long-term fleet. But I can confirm that having driven the M3 Touring and the M3 Saloon extensively, there's no significant difference driving-wise between the two. Anyway, back to the video. We'll start behind the wheel of the Giulia Quadrifoglio, as it is technically speaking the newest car here. You can spot the latest version of the QV thanks to its new 3x3 headlights with very effective adaptive LED matrix tech, standard fit dark 5-hole 19-inch alloys and a revised rear light cluster. Plus, on the inside, a new 12.3-inch digital dashboard display with the delightful heritage dial mode also debuts. Honestly though, that's not what this car is about. What it is about is the feeling you get when you're driving it. And the first thing that strikes me when I get in one of these is that you can drive off in town and on the motorway and it doesn't feel like a serious performance car. It doesn't feel like a Quadrifoglio. And I mean that in a good way because it plays the whole dual personality thing very well indeed. You've got your drive modes down here, so advanced efficiency, normal, dynamic and race, and there's no kind of customization apart from switching the damper setting if you want to soften it off when you're in the sportier modes. But if you just leave it in normal, it's a nice, quite comfortable thing to drive around in. It's also quiet, apart from some wind noise around the wing mirror. The ride is good for something this performance focused, and you just get the feeling that this car glides or flits along the road. It doesn't feel like a 500 brake horsepower super saloon that's saying, I must crush the very tarmac that sits beneath me. There's none of that going on at all. What the Giulia Quadrifoglio does exceptionally well is make driving at 5 or 6 or 7 tenths a hugely enjoyable experience. Part of this is down to the weight, because at the time of filming, the Giulia QV's 1660 kilogram curb weight is around 150 kilograms less than the equivalent rear-wheel drive M3 Saloon. However, with the M4 becoming X-Drive only, it's not hard to see the M3 following suit at some point, and this would add an extra 50 kilograms or so. As such, the Giulia QV's adaptive dampers have to do less work, and that's apparent in its wonderfully flowing feel. I'm also a big fan of the steering. I mean, the wheel itself is one of the nicest in any normal car that's on sale today. It feels nice in your hands, the materials are good, it's a nice size, there's a nice engine start button down there, it's got proper buttons, and the paddles are, I mean, they're fantastic. But also the rack is super quick and accurate. It is really quite something. I mean, if you just wiggle the wheel like that, the whole car moves around. It's so fast in this thing. I remember when it came out a few years ago, it almost felt a bit too quick, but I don't think it is. It's not nervous, so that if you so much as sneeze, you end up in a bush. It doesn't do that. It quietens down on the motorway, but it is incredibly accurate, and every time you make a move, the car shifts with it. It pivots around it. And what's really impressive is that there are other cars with quick steering, perhaps not as quick as this, but it's not something that's unique to the Giulia Quadrifoglio. But what this does
is the rear end can keep up with the quick steering. You often find it that the rear end can't cash the checks that the steering is writing, but in this, it does. The rear of the car follows the front and it feels so cohesive.
And speaking of the rear end, Alfa's new diff is probably the most significant mechanical alteration on the new Giulia QV. Previously, it was an electronic limited slip diff that often felt inconsistent when powering away from tight corners and didn't stand up well under hard use. Now, however, it's mechanical and far more consistent in its actions.
I don't think it loses anything becoming a mechanical diff from an electronic setup, but what you do gain, especially in the slower corners, is consistency. You want to know that you can rotate it with the throttle and just help the car round, and with the old setup, it didn't always do that. Now though, it just does exactly what you expect it to. Also notice how smooth this 2.9 litre turbocharged V6 engine is. It is absolutely silky. You could say it's a cut down Ferrari 488 engine, which is pretty high praise when this is a 4-door saloon car, and power is now up to 513 brake horsepower, up from 503. I can't really tell the difference if I'm being brutally honest. It's still very quick, but it doesn't feel any quicker than before.
There's not a huge amount of noise from the engine. Instead, it seems to come almost entirely from the exhaust pipes, but it's a nice noise, if a little muted. 443 pounds-foot of torque comes in from 2,500 RPM and does so smoothly, while the run to the red line, now higher than before, is both incredibly brisk and satisfying.
Also, these gear shift paddles. Did I mention how much I like them? There's so many cars now that get them wrong. They're too small, they're plasticky. In this, they're big metal units and they feel fantastic when you use them. I'm not entirely convinced the box they're attached to is perfect. It can be a bit clunky at low speeds, a little bit too aggressive, and then when you want to quickly down change, it's not bad. But sometimes, especially if you go for a double change quickly, you can catch it out a bit. And it is starting to feel a little bit older than some rivals. I mean, I can see why Alfa Romeo has barely changed this car several years on from when it first came out. It is still phenomenal. My only lingering thought about the driving experience is it a bit of a 7/10 or an 8/10 car? Because with some cars, you can really push them, and the more you push them, the more that you get out of them. In this, it feels like you get to a point, and then afterwards, there's quite significant diminishing returns. It's like the body control starts to feel a little bit wobblier, and you really do feel like you've hit this car's potential. That's the only slight criticism I'm feeling at the moment, but other than that, it is awesome.
So, Alfa Romeo has taken an already very good car and made it even better. Not by much, but is it enough to hold off the M3? At the time of filming, the saloon versions of both cars cost from around £80,000, both deliver around 500 brake horsepower, and both are at the top of their game. But which is better?
Well, you know what? I've just got in the M3 from the Giulia Quadrifoglio, and the first thing that strikes me is the seating position. Now, these are the optional £4,000 carbon seats, so they are expensive, but I can sit so low in the car. It feels fantastic from where I'm sitting. It's a proper performance car driving position. I mean, I know these seats, they won't be for everyone. I've heard from some people that they are very uncomfortable, so I guess it just depends on your body type. But for me, I'm really comfortable in them, and I can sit so fantastically low. I think I can even go a little bit lower, which is just incredible. Really love the seating position. I've also got way more adjustment for the drive modes. I've got M1 and M2 shortcut buttons. I can shortcut to the different setup options, so I can change the chassis, I can change the steering, the brake feel. You can't do any of those things, or only the chassis with the Giulia Quadrifoglio. I mean, the cabin, it feels a hell of a lot more expensive. The materials are nicer. And also the infotainment system is just in a completely different league to the Alphas. It's so far ahead.
Advantage BMW then. But it doesn't take long for the Alfa to claw its way back into contention, because the M3 is pretty much the opposite of the Giulia Quadrifoglio when driven normally.
It's very firm and bold and meaty feeling, even at 30 miles an hour. I mean, the ride is definitely stiffer. There's more road noise in here as well, and it doesn't feel like a particularly delicate thing.
It just means that the BMW sometimes feels a bit over the top at low to medium speeds. It's less tactile and feels more desperate to show off what it can really do when you switch the engine, chassis, steering, exhaust and brakes up to 11.
Yes, this is more like it. It is loud, it's shouty. Some might say it's too aggressive, but there's a very, very good reason for this. It talks a big game, but it can also deliver. Base figures of 503 brake horsepower and 479 pounds-foot of torque. 0 to 62 miles an hour takes just 3.5 seconds with xDrive. And while it might be a little bit less powerful and heavier than the Alfa Romeo, it honestly feels, I think, a little bit quicker. I don't think the engine is as smooth or as sonorous as the Alfa Romeo's. The sound is just a little bit more fake, but it does come into its own right at the top end. It feels more exciting. It's got more of a fizz to it. I mean, between 4,000 and 7,000 RPM, it's a proper rocket ship.
Where the M3 does feel more similar to the Giulia is in its steering. The wheel itself isn't as nice in your hands, but the M1 and M2 shortcut buttons are very useful, and the responses on the front wheels are equally as sharp, if not even more so. We really are at a point where today's super saloon steers sharper than yesterday's supercars.
Nice feel on the brakes, I think a little bit more intuitive than the Alfa Romeos, which is interesting because these are carbons and the Giulias are not. What's honestly so impressive with this is the faster you go, the lighter this car feels. It almost wipes out that weight disadvantage to the Giulia. And then there's the steering. It's a very quick rack, just like the Giulias. But then once you get past the initial turn-in, so should we say about 9 till 11 and 1 till 3 on the clock face, that's where the BMW steering, it feels more alive, it feels more positive. You have a better idea of what's going on, which I wasn't expecting. As you send this thing into a corner, you've just got a better idea of what the car is doing more of the time than you do in the Alfa Romeo. It's got better body control, and it's got a better front end as well. I mean, honestly, how have they done this? It's just incredible. And then, of course, you've got that flexibility with the xDrive that if you want the all-wheel drive traction, fine, you've got it. If you want a little bit more push to the rear, you can put it in four-wheel drive sport. And if you want it entirely in two-wheel drive, just like the Giulia, then yeah, you can do that as well. You know, the range of ability that this thing offers is honestly breathtaking. And I know it's boring to say that BMW's M division has nailed it again, but they have. This thing is, it's so impressive.
Picking a winner from this test was difficult, not because one car doesn't convincingly edge ahead, but because both are so incredibly likeable for different reasons. I really do think that each will appeal to a surprisingly different customer base. However, the BMW's breadth of ability and, when it comes down to it, sharper dynamics, superior body control and more up-to-date cabin give it the win. Despite how you might feel about the looks, the car underneath is stunningly talented and goes to show just what BMW's M division is still capable of. The M3 is the winner, but honestly, if you're in a position to be choosing between these two cars, then you cannot lose because they are both utterly brilliant. Thank you for watching.